Welcome to Bahá'í Books and Authors, a podcast which introduces to you writers and the works they've penned related to the Bahá'í Faith. We'll explore the inspiration, the process, and the stories behind their work. I'm your host, Jan Grammer. This podcast is produced by World Unity Media, which also produces Bahá'í audiobooks. Louis George Gregory was a distinguished African-American Bahá'í known for his dedication to racial unity and equality. He was born in 1874 in Charleston, South Carolina, during the Reconstruction period after the Civil War. He was well educated, graduating from college, and receiving his law degree from Howard University. How does this man, born of slaves, losing his father at the age of 4, leaving his family in abject poverty while growing up within the Jim Crow era, achieve such success in life? And most especially, what led to his being named a hand of the cause of God? Why did he take on the mantle of working for racial justice and equality, and how did this change or effloresce after he embraced the Bahá'í Faith? Champions of Oneness, Louis Gregory and His Shining Circle, is a book that not only honors Gregory's remarkable life and legacy, but also the inspiring group of individuals who supported and expanded his mission of racial equality. These champions helped forge a path toward a more unified, inclusive future. I'm fortunate to have author Janet Ruhe-Schoen with me today to discuss Louis Gregory's life and the collective impact of his special circle. Welcome, Janet.
It's wonderful to be here. It's always a great honor to be able to discuss Louis George Gregory, who was a phenomenal soul. It's been my honor to get to know him better by writing about him and also by writing about the people he worked with.
Your book has background, anecdotes, and stories of many early believers in America, with one, Louis Gregory, at the center. Why is he the primary focus?
I went through many different ideas for this manuscript, which was originally a concept that sprang off of the first book I published, which is called A Love Which Does Not Wait, which is about 9 individuals that Shoghi Effendi mentioned in a telegram. When Marian Jack died, he said she'd gone to join her co-workers in the Amapa kingdom. There was a chapter on each of the people, and they were all outstanding, phenomenal believers who had met Abdu'l-Baha and had their lives transformed by him and were spiritual giants in his footsteps. So I thought, well, let's have a more diverse group. So, of course, I thought of Louis Gregory, who, as an African-American, was one of our great examples of a pioneering man of color who was a leader in the faith. He was a leader in teaching and in administrative work. It's really hard to overestimate all of his contributions to the growth of the faith in the first half of the 20th century. That kind of started me off, and then in researching all kinds of other people, I ended up with a very diverse crew, and the reason it's called Louis Gregory and His Shining Circle is that he would write letters to everyone, not just the people in the book, but he would often say, "Love to you and all your shining circle," referring to the Baha'is, the friends close to him and most understood his message of racial amity, which he had pioneered throughout this country.
Was Louis Gregory involved in the quest for racial equality before he learned of the Bahá'í Faith?
Yes, he was a very radical activist. He had become a lawyer, but he was in touch with W.E.B. Du Bois. In fact, W.E.B. Du Bois, who was the great Harlem Renaissance poet and writer, and who founded the NAACP and its magazine, The Crisis, he really thought Louis Gregory was a very promising young man. So Louis Gregory used to give all these very fiery speeches and write these very fiery articles agitating for very fiery activism. And he was very angry. But when he became a Baha'i, his activism changed. It didn't cease its commitment. If anything, it became more so, became based on love, total love. It was an unbelievable transformation in the soul of this man.
Soon after he became a Baha'i in 1909, at the age of 35, Louis Gregory had a significant vision of Baha'u'llah. Can you tell us about that vision? And then what was Abdu'l-Baha's later explanation of it?
He saw Baha'u'llah with his head bent forward, right arm extended, 4 layers of mellow golden light flowing from his right side, each layer containing spirals and beautiful figures. When the glow vanished, Louis saw himself on a street in which some enemies of the cause were menacing the believers. This is his writing. I raised my right hand above my head and shouted, "It is all true. Mine eyes have seen the glory." In telling of his vision, Louis referenced the Bible, and looking that up, we read, And it shall come to pass afterward that I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your old men shall dream dreams, your young men shall see visions. Lewis's echoing of mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. The first line of the Battle Hymn of the Republic links biblical prophecy to his own era, to the Civil War to free the slaves, to the issuing of the Emancipation Proclamation, which happened a few months before Baha'u'llah's announcement of his mission in Baghdad. So Lewis's mystical awakening would be strengthened by all his interactions with the Master. When he was on pilgrimage and he told Abdu'l-Baha of the vision, the Master likened the figures in the 4 layers of light to people of 4 kinds: those who join the Baha'i cause and labor for it, those who believe in it but remain quiescent, those who hear of it but don't accept it, those who haven't yet heard of it. Then there are those who deny and oppose, and he told Lewis, you have already had experience enough to know what this means. And he knew that the moment Lewis became a Baha'i, he rose up and began to tell people about the Baha'i faith. He instantly obeyed the mission that Abdu'l-Baha gave to him in his first tablet to him in 1909, where he said, I hope that thou mayest become the means whereby the white and colored people shall close their eyes to racial difference and behold the reality of humanity. And that is the universal reality, which is the oneness of the kingdom of the human race. So this intrinsic reality, this intrinsic oneness, was what healed Lewis's heart and set him on his path of mystical activism, because that concept of oneness is really a mystical concept.
Louis Gregory and Louisa Matthew were married in 1911, not long after. This is most likely the first interracial marriage between black and white in the Baha'i faith. Really unusual for that time. How did they enhance the life and the service of one another?
It's hard to gauge. It's so infinite what they did for one another. I think one of the things that was a great discovery for me in writing about Louis and Louisa was the depth of their love for one another. Because I think in early days of my Baha'i life, people had a kind of thing like, oh yeah, they got married. Abdu'l-Baha wanted them to get married, but they kind of thought, oh, but she was in Europe a lot. Nobody really realized that there was this huge romance going on inside this marriage. But when you read their letters to each other, an incredible love. She'd call, my darling boy, do you have a sweater? He'd say, she's a gem among women. My Louisa is the great handmaid. And he'd write to her, are you warm enough? Are you keeping warm enough? This was a great adventure of love that they embarked upon. I think that love grew over the years as they admired each other's services because they couldn't be together. They had to suffer intense loneliness for each other. They couldn't be together in the South where he was teaching because their marriage was illegal. They could have been in great danger, and there would be no place for them to stay together. There was no place they could rent or live in as they were traveling. He had enough trouble finding places where he could stay. And this, of course, brings out the tremendous radicalism of Abdu'l-Baha because he just encouraged the Baha'is to intermarry. He was encouraging tremendous fearlessness, and it meant that a Baha'i had to be very fearless to try to live up to it. So Louis and Louisa were the depth of their commitment to each other and of the example they set for us is really immeasurable.
How has the researching and then the writing of this book impacted your own personal understanding about racial unity and the Baha'i faith?
I had always been worried about racial equality all my life as a child. I was not brought up as a Baha'i. I was brought up in a Jewish family. I didn't know a lot of people of other races. I didn't know a lot of people who weren't Jewish. I had always wanted to have a much more diverse experience in life. So when I became a Baha'i, I was very happy. And I was very eager to meet all the different kinds of people who were Baha'is. I mean, I have a lot of anger. I have a lot of political awareness from my upbringing, social action, civil rights, a lot of political awareness in that upbringing as an American Jewish person in the 60s. What I learned through Louis Gregory is that this anger is normal, it's natural, but you need to practice what I call active patience. I think that he had active patience. As Abdu'l-Baha said, have patience, wait, but do not sit idle. Work while you are waiting. Smile while you are wearied with monotony. Be firm while everything around you is being shaken. Be joyous while the ugly face of despair grins at you. Speak aloud while the malevolent forces of the netherworld try to crush your mind. Be valiant and courageous while men all around you are cringing with fear and cowardice. Do not yield to the overwhelming power of tyranny and despotism. Continue your journey to the end. The bright day is coming. I mean, that is Louis Gregory to a T. This happened to me in writing about Tahirih, too. You start out kind of from a political standpoint. Oh, here's this woman that upheld the equality of men and women and divested herself of her veil, and how can I make this relevant to political issues in this time? You can make it relevant, but the more you learn about the person of Tahirih, and it's the same with Louis Gregory, the more you learn about the person who upheld these principles of oneness, the more you see that that person was so far from being a political figure. They were saints. They were spiritual saints. They were spiritual beings. This was a great thing that I learned. Louis Gregory had stringent self-discipline and even asceticism. Because when he traveled, he had very little money. He had given up his law practice and had sacrificed tremendously, and his wife sacrificed tremendously to keep him on the road and keep him traveling, teaching, having integrated meetings, speaking in churches all over the South, speaking in schools, universities. He would go to a town where he didn't know anybody. He would be riding a train and sitting in the part that was only for Black people, which was the worst part. Dirty, you sat on these hard seats, you had dust blowing in your mouth and your hair up your nostrils. He and Roy Williams would travel under these conditions. Oftentimes they were hungry. They only had money for maybe 2 meals a day. Lewis's health suffered greatly, his stomach, his digestion. He had pain from this kind of life. They suffered near homelessness. If they went into a town where there was no place for an African American to stay, they'd have to stay on a bench in the Black person's waiting room in the railroad station. This kind of self-discipline and asceticism is really something to remember when we are subjected to hardships and tests. Then he also had the discipline of happiness. He learned from his grandmother that it is better to be lighthearted than brokenhearted. His grandmother was an ex-slave, and she taught him this. He was joyous. He knew he was bringing Abdu'l-Bahá's presence to people. When he was posthumously named a Hand of the Cause, when you look at his life and deeds, we see how he was fulfilling the duties of a hand all along. The hands of the cause are to diffuse the divine fragrances, edify the souls of men, promote learning, and improve the character of all men, and to be at all times and under all conditions sanctified and detached from earthly things. So he always was. That's what he was doing.
Louis Gregory's life and story, certainly one of great courage and perseverance. What do you hope the readers of your book will take away from his life and those of his shining circle?
A spirit of hope, a can-do spirit, if you will. He said, earth and air, fire and water, the stars in their courses, the high tide of destiny, and the will of divine providence are all arrayed against the forces of oppression. And this is very important, I think, nowadays, right now, in what is happening in the world. Is we see rising forces of oppression. People have a tendency to despair and say, what on earth are we going to do? There are all these wars. There's the racial inequality goes on, the unrest, hatred among people. It seems to get worse. It's really a time of tremendous testing for all of us. So this spirit of hope, the right and justice will prevail, that all the forces of the universe tend towards unity and love and oneness. That was Louis Gregory's belief, and he saw, he went right into the race riots in Oklahoma. He went right at that time in 1919 when they had horrible race riots, and it was called the Red Summer, and terrible oppression, riots, people burning down African-American homes and businesses, and he was right there. He went right in, and he kept doing his work of peaceful unification, talking to people and bringing them together. And then the Baha'is after him, the people in this book, they would go, and eventually they started forming local spiritual assemblies in these areas where Louis had been, where he had gone and been the only Baha'i to ever arrive there. So we can't give up. We can't lose that spirit of hope. Whatever loneliness we suffer, however much we feel estranged or alone, or the moods that we have and all these human problems we have, we just have to go on with that feeling of hope. And I hope that's what people get from reading about him and his friends.
Thank you so much, Janet, for writing this book and for being with us today.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. Champions of Oneness, Louis Gregory and His Shining Circle by Janet Ruhe-Schoen is available on Bahá'íBookstore.com or wherever you get your distribution services. Subscribe or follow Bahá'í Books and Authors with your chosen podcast platform. This podcast is produced by World Unity Media.